Thank you very much. You can hear me, right? The microphone. Okay, so maybe first, before we start, I have to tell you, when we thought about the program of this ALDUS UP and what the content will be, I was brainstorming what are the subjects that we deal with as publishers all the time. And one that really interests me personally, and it's like in the air, is this transformative narrative. People talk about transformative narrative all the time regarding climate change. And I thought, what is this transformative narrative? What do we talk about when we talk about transformative narrative? And then we work with children's books. What is this reality within publishers? So this is how this subject came up. And I started to think of how to organize the panel. And I thought, well, we're going to talk about different contexts in different countries. And we're going to talk to bigger and smaller publishers to see how to start this conversation. So this is it. Today we're here with three great publishers. We'll be meeting them right now. And this will be the start of conversations. So I hope you can also participate with questions. And I welcome Denise and Brad and Ayushi. And they'll be telling you about their publishing houses now, first, to introduce themselves and so that you know who is speaking. So Denise, can we start with you, please?
Okay. So hello, everyone. I'm Denise Johnston-Burt. I'm Publishing Director at Walker Books UK in London. We're a medium-sized independent publisher of only children's books, and we don't have any adult imprints or anything. And we publish fiction and non-fiction, we publish picture books, we publish baby books, we publish novelty books, we publish every kind of book that we feel is good for children in some shape or form. So we have a broad list. It's a trade publisher, so we publish through the trade channels, and of course we do a lot of co-edition business with our partners around the world, and we sell a lot of our titles in many different languages and so on. We have a sister company in America as well, and in Australia. And just in terms of our publishing, just to say that as the publishing director, I really, really believe that climate change is the most important issue facing us all. And as a result, we have to take it into every aspect of our publishing. So what I look for in the books we're publishing is, if it's a novel, that we have, you know, the world that involves the things that we are doing about climate change in that world. So if the characters are driving down the motorway in a novel, there can be wind turbines next to them. I mean, it has to be part of the narrative of the landscape of the world. Because I think that children we have felt a little nervous of very, very brutal approaches to climate change. It can cause anxiety, and so we have to bring it in a positive way and somehow manage to make it everywhere in the story. Many of us have seen a lot of documentaries where nature is really, really beautiful, and we're very used to that. And we need to get away from this idea that we are separate from nature, we are part of it, and so on. So I think that families often need to interpret these stories with children. So some of the books that I'll talk about, and later perhaps, and show, are where we try and do this and communicate generally. So
yeah. Thank you. This is what we'll be talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for introducing this and your publishing house. Ayushi, can you tell us a little bit about your publishing house and yourself and the general context. I think we have some pictures illustrating
it's just
Ayushi's presentation.
Yeah, I'm from Art First. We're a company based in India which publishes books on various issues through the medium of art. So our books are mostly art education. The non-fiction or narrative non-fiction, we don't do fiction. And that's just one of the things the company that I work with does. We also have programs which we run with schools. We do some curriculum building. We work with teachers and do mentor programs with them. And a lot of our curriculum and a lot of the programs that we work with schools on are about how to get the children that we're working with out there and appreciating their surroundings, their nature, especially in these rapidly urbanizing spaces, rapidly gentrifying spaces. There's a huge disconnect between the nature and a child or even us, and how to get them to appreciate nature, appreciate their surroundings again, and how to get them to not, like Denise said, not to put it across in an abstract way that the world is ending, but just to sort of spark joy or use their natural sense of wonder and use that to make them appreciate nature more. And that guides most of our programs, and that also reflects in our books. But it's a part of it. It's not a didactic approach. It's not as if we say, okay, this book is about nature or climate change and you must do this. So yeah, that's mostly.
Thank you. All right. So Brad.
All right, brilliant. My name is Brad Harris. I am the publishing director at Imagnary House, which is a children's book and young adult literature publisher from South Africa. It's quite an interesting context we have in South Africa because South Africa's developed, our cities have developed with a very economical focus rather than any lifestyle focus. So you find cities with really lacking green spaces at all. But then in between the cities are huge rural areas and agricultural areas. So there's quite stark contrasts in different spaces in South Africa. And children that grow up in cities often don't have much experience of the nature that's within their own country. So that's also some of the context that we come to publishing books about climate change and environmentalism when we do look at publishing children's books, because much like what Ayushi and Denise have mentioned, we want children to fall in love with nature before they feel like they need to do anything about it, before they feel like they need to take action. We want them to feel like that they love just a tree for being a tree, and they want the tree to be around forever. And so that's the kind of spirit that we try to imbue into the titles that we create. Yeah, a little bit about Imaginary House, just to give some context before I finish off. I've jumped ahead and back, sorry. But we publish primarily African authors, and we try to give our African authors an international stage. So we have a very strong rights focus. We try to take our local titles and distribute them globally. So we create books in Africa, but we publish globally. And I hope that you see some of our titles during the talk today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. So we see, I mean, there are so many subjects coming up, like the context. What is the context of your where are you publishing, and what is the reality of environmental issues in those contexts, and what is your approach to that? So what kind of books do you publish? Is it fiction? Is it non-fiction, the way to approach? So maybe you can raise up this subject. In your catalog, how can you see this narrative that you use for these issues? Climate change, environmental protection, environmental justice. Denise, maybe you can give us some examples of.
So I think what we're looking to do is to create positive, positive relationships with nature, with the natural world, but also to feed in this narrative, like I was saying before, that this is the world we're in. And I think you can do that in lots of ways. One way you can do it through beautiful, beautiful art and engage the child with this beauty. And I mean, a book that we did was a walk through a rainforest, which is, I mean, this book took many, many years to make, but I don't know if you can see the art from here, but it's incredible, incredible. And you want to just engage with it and then find out about the rainforest. Then we also do it through guides, which are for slightly older children. So where you, we did a book, we started with a book called Kids Fight Plastic, which was empowerment for children to actually, things they can do. And we got together with a company in England who is a man who does a thing called #2minutes, which is in 2 minutes, he cleans the beach with people. And you too can do 2 minutes of cleaning the beach. And so this is very local to us. But this idea caught on, and this book, Kids Fight Plastic, was published in 17 countries in the world. So it's sort of, the message was universal, and it's kind of finding that. And we've done further titles. It looks like this. It's a little colour.
Yeah,
You know,
it's a great book,
format.
by the way. Yeah.
And then there are other ways through fables. We published Sean Tan, who wrote a book, a beautiful gift book called Tales from the Inner City, which is just, it's the most thought-provoking, sort of slightly more adult, sophisticated book. I think you can do it through fiction, with children fighting for the world. We published a YA novel called Green Rising, which is about a futuristic world. It's fiction. It's through all these international, it's all about storytelling. Mm-hmm. And we can tell the stories that can engage children, that can enable them to understand their world better, have empathy, and then engage with the world as it is. Mm-hmm. So.
Could you give us some examples of the context and the work of your publishing house? Brad, maybe you can mention.
Yeah,
yours.
of course. I tend to agree with Denise on all points. So I think it's very similar for us. Like I mentioned before, it's trying to create that excitement in the child first off, and then you can lead into action. So for a lot of our books, much like a walk through the rainforest, we've got a book called Hello Trees, and it's stunning in my opinion. But it's actually quite a simple story about a girl taking a walk through a forest, and she's interacting with the trees. And as she does so, she begins asking questions about them, and she just gets curious. So it's just, the story is really just about the curiosity of a child, and the trees are there, and she's interacting with them. And she begins asking questions like, when I swing in their branches, do they smile? And when I build a tree house up top, do they get excited? Do they get sad when they get cut down? And we've really seen children interact with this because it's not telling them they should do anything, it's not telling them that they should think in any particular way, but it's just inviting them to ask the questions of how they can interact with nature. And obviously, those questions then develop empathy beyond nature as well, because climate change isn't only about the relationship with nature. When you grow up, it becomes about how you use technology, what decisions you make on a daily basis. So I think if we can just start the stories that get children asking those questions correctly, then we're doing well, and the generations can do better than the past. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your contribution, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sure you also have examples to
Yeah, and in
tell us.
fact, Brad and I were talking about this earlier because in one of the schools that we run a program with and we have an engagement with them, one of the components of that was called Trees, Trees, Trees. And we got, it was just asking the children to go out and look at trees and document trees in whichever way that appealed to them. So some of them made videos, some of them made art, some of them did a podcast, some of them, so they were just documenting it in whichever ways, and there was no direction given to them about how they should look at trees or if there's something specific that we're looking for. It was just about go out there and enjoy the experience of studying trees and admiring them, or just whatever strikes you. So, and at the end of it, we did an exhibit, I believe, of their works. So it just reminded me of that it's again that same spirit of just inquiry and encouraging them to go out there and feel connected to things, to just go out there and feel excited about looking at trees, looking at nature. Also because often I think I grew up in a city a big city in India, and growing up I had a terrible fear of the natural world, because I mean you like trees, you like manicured gardens, but just things like insects or bees, or we're constantly waging a war to try to keep the natural world outside of our homes. The home space is this safe, sanitized space which we clean, and we keep the trees outside. We don't want any spiders making their homes inside our houses. And so I think this is one of those ways where I realize it's because I did not have the access to these kind of spaces where I could learn to coexist with nature in that same way. And so a lot of our programs are about this. It's just about appreciating nature and to not feel uneasy around nature, to not think of it as another thing which we need to keep separate from us.
And how is it in the communities you work with? I mean, is this, or are these topics of interest of the community, or do you have to go and reach for readers and audience and children's school?
I mean, in the schools, again, it's because most of the schools we're working with at the moment are in cities, and all cities have the same problem where we're trying to push nature away. We're reclaiming the sea, we're cutting down the mangroves and using those to create, develop land for buildings. So another one of the schools that we work with in Mumbai, in one of Mumbai, Bombay, I don't know how people know it, but it's built on a mangrove, and the children we just thought that the children may not even know the importance of the delicate ecosystem that their school is in. So again, the project was just to get them out there, exploring the mangroves and getting them to understand what kind of an ecosystem it is, how many communities, not just other living things, but how many communities depend on such an ecosystem, and how can they be a part of it. And mangrove pollution mangroves are very, very important to controlling many things, but keeping the ecosystem in a balance. And so just getting the kids to learn that, but it wasn't a lecture, it was just to get them out there talking to the people who live there, who make their livelihoods out of living in those places, the fishermen, the people who set up shops there. And then again, some of them took their own initiative, some of them decided that they wanted to clean up the mangroves. So they came up with their own initiative to start a cleaning drive every Sunday to just clean up whatever garbage that they could find. So yeah, it's similar. It's just that in urban spaces especially, I think not just kids, but we as adults forget that there is a world out there, there is a natural world out there for us to be connected with.
Right, so Brad, can you relate to that? Is that something that you find similar to your reality, or is it completely different?
No, it is quite similar. A slightly different context, but there's similarities in that I think families living in urban spaces in South Africa, and especially on the outskirts of urban spaces, like I said, South Africa's developed with an economic focus, and that comes out of a lot of people not having enough money, and so the goal at the end of their day is to make money for the next day or for the next month. And so lifestyle, environment, these things are not on their mind, and so parents aren't talking to their children about it, even if the parents are aware of the landscape around them and the environment, climate change. And so I think a lot of children growing up in the urban areas of South Africa are not aware that climate change is a real issue. And even seeing a lack of green spaces is it's not foreign to them. Obviously you don't want to, we never want to scare children. That's the opposite of what we want to do. But you also want children to understand that a lack of green space and a lack of nature is abnormal. It's not what they should expect. It's not what they should be used to. And so how do you introduce that to them slowly? But yeah, in South Africa it is. It's tricky because not everyone has access to that directly. So that the only way they can get it is through books and reading and other forms of literature. But a lot of children may go a long time, weeks, months, without interacting with a forest, or a large green space. So again, how do we talk to those children if they don't have true context of what it is? I'm asking the question. I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
It's something that plays in our minds as publishers, I think.
Yeah. And are there other publishers, like children books publishers as well, go in this direction, like addressing the topic of environmental issues? Or is it something that needs to be developed?
I think it definitely needs more attention.
Right.
But I think there is a fair amount of attention being given to it. A lot of publishers are giving climate change attention in how they do operations rather than the books they publish. So how can they reduce their carbon footprint instead of necessarily going out and talking or including nature in their titles intentionally, which is absolutely fine, and we should all be doing that as well anyway. But I think that, like Denise said, I think including nature or sustainability naturally within our stories is the way to go. And I think we should be doing that more intentionally on a broader scale.
Yeah. So, and then we jump onto a bigger publishing house. And we heard to smaller publishing houses, like working directly with children and with schools. How is it like for a bigger publisher to reach the audiences? Because it's like mainly selling the books, getting to the libraries, but do you also collaborate with environmental institutions, and do you do this kind of work behind the book?
Yes, we do. We work a lot with organisations like in Britain we work with the RSPB, who are the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, and we did books with them, and we donate some royalty to them. As I said, we did the 2-minute beach clean, and a percentage of all those books goes to that charity. And so we try to link up with institutions like that. But the main thing I think that we feel, because we have had a long-standing series that we've done for 30 years now, which is what we call our nature storybooks. And they are non-fiction stories with picture book illustration. And so you read them as a child like you read a picture book, but they are non-fiction. And we feel that these are family books. And so what we did from the very beginning, and we've got something like 50 or 60 titles now, we changed the text so that the story reads as a story of non-fiction about a whale or a puffin or whatever, or a tree, but there's a smaller text which is for the adult, and it can be a teacher, it can be a parent, it can be an older child, it can be another person, but it's written at a slightly higher level, and it actually gives some of the background so that that person can be the person who communicates the underlying story to the child. So it's a sort of double way of approaching the audience. And I think it's about balance as well, I think. Children don't like being, and I think you feel exactly the same. They don't like being talked down to, but they don't want to be alarmed. And we had another interesting book recently where it was a book about 24 hours on our planet, and it took every hour and looked at a different creature that was living at that hour and was endangered. And it's really fantastically illuminating. But when we showed it to one of our international partners, they said it's too scary. It's just too scary. And so we had to look again at the thing to keep it, but to be able to give some hope in each of these environments. So I find that we come up with that against that quite a lot.
Yeah. Well, this is like this transformative narrative we were talking about. How do we approach with, do we scare them with an apocalyptic language, or do we give hope? And I guess these are three completely different contexts, but it's more or less like going that way. I would love to have questions from the audience, because this is a big subject, and as I said, this is just starting conversations. But if you have questions, please feel free to ask. And we've got, and of course, you can visit the booths of the three publishing houses and see the books, see the examples, yes, and be curious. Go and find the books, but you can ask questions. Now,
I thought something that she said was very interesting about the children relating to the environment in through different media, because I think that's also very much an important part of what we're doing.
yeah.
So, some of our books being made into films, into podcasts or whatever, and reaching children in different ways, it really, really makes a difference to the reach and the audience.
And I think a good work is also like to work with the teachers, like to go and train teachers how to use these books, like, and to be, to make this material more visible. Not only the books, but the films made after the books. Yes, but you wanted to say something.
No, I was just saying it's also an interesting thought, and I think I'm a big believer and promoter of works that aren't didactic. But there's also the question, at which point, Denise was talking about different mediums now, at which point do you start ensuring that the children are learning more specific things about how they can assist with, climate change, just taking care of nature in general. And so I think, and I speak for myself now as well, I think as publishers we try to create the most creative, beautiful books we can, even with great intentions about environmentalism and climate change. But can we be more intentional about at what point do we start introducing more specific messaging, and what age groups, in what mediums? I think that's.
Yeah, I think that to add to what Brad said, that's also what we try to do through the work that we do with schools, which is not just, anyway, we don't teach them about climate change in that way, but just try to instill a love of nature in them. But then we also like to just introduce them to organizations working on the ground, where just to let them know that if it's something that they like, if it's something that they feel strongly about, they can actually go and work with them, and they can actually volunteer with them. Because it's not just telling the children that, oh, the world is ending and there's nothing that we can do about it, or just give them these large abstract ideas about fossil fuels or carbon footprint, which are words that may not relate too much, which they may not relate too much to, and they may feel like it's too big for them to take any action about. But to just give them these small organizations, something that they can help with. There's an organization in Bombay, it's called Dharavi Rocks. Dharavi is the biggest slum in Mumbai, and the children from that slum, they got together to start clearing up the garbage, and whatever garbage that they found, whatever trash that they found, they turned those into instruments. So they now actually have a band called Dharavi Rocks, and they tour India, these kids, with their band. And so you can also volunteer with them, and you can help them with this. So just to let the kids know that there are ways for them to engage with change without overwhelming them with information.
And don't you think that these kind of like good results, let's say positive results, should be made books afterwards, like the band, like being featured in a book? Because this is like, we need like those positive examples, probably, how community work.
There is a lot being done in India, in Indian publishing, about climate change, but again, there's scope for a lot more. It's never enough. And yeah, it's not easy to document everything that's being done, but there's so much that's being done, and all you can do is hope that you can give these children a nudge towards these things, and then they find their way to it somehow on their own.
I mean, you know, you talked about how children in India are quite often separate from nature, and
in urban spaces, yes.
Yeah, in urban spaces. And it isn't dissimilar, actually, in a lot of countries like Britain, where children live in cities and they have very, very little connection with, you know, the natural world. But so something we're quite interested in is looking at technological future. And Brad, you touched on that, and I think, you know, the idea that there are things you can do in the future that will be, you know, wonderful jobs that you might have in the future. We're doing a book looking at that, and how you could be an engineer in this kind of work or something. So putting a positive future on it that they can be part of.
Yeah. Well, we tend to, so, sorry, I said I ask questions and then, yes, so go ahead, sorry.
It's such an important topic. I think we all agree that we should make books that make children fall in love with nature, and adults with nature, of course. We should make that also. But, of course, the problem is much more complex, as you might agree. And if we are talking about transformative narratives, how about to transform the narrative on how to succeed in life through consumerism? And I think that the relation between consumerism and climate change is not so strong as it should be, as well as the tyranny of convenience. I think we should address that also in children's books, that it's more about the journey, that the end of the journey, not living, not having. I think that's very important for books to talk about.
Do you have like precise examples of stories that portray that? Any comment?
Well, any book. I remember one probably was published in the US, but I forgot the title, I'm sorry. But it's about a girl that walks to the school, probably in the city, and the father is always telling the girl, hurry up, let's go. And she's looking at small things on the streets, and it's more about like mindfulness. Like every single, if she finds a new flower that's coming out from the street, from the floor, that
Yeah, we brought in a book from Canada called Small in the City by Sydney Smith. And it's a beautiful picture book, and it's exactly that. It's,
very good example.
yeah, it's a wonderful book.
We have this upcoming publication. It hasn't been published yet. It's called An Unflinching Paintbrush, which is, it also touches upon nature, but it is about social justice mostly. And it is about this. It is about a child. It's from the perspective of a child who says that the child likes painting, and the child is told to paint, you know, happy, positive things all the time. But the child wants to paint more mindfully. So the child, you know, sees things. The child sees the sea being reclaimed and buildings being built on it. So just being mindful of the space that you are inhabiting in the world, and that how you have sort of had made your way into nature and taken over it, which has led to habitat loss. And especially in India, and maybe, I mean, a lot of these countries, rivers are very important in India, and a lot of our civilizations, older civilizations came up around rivers. So rivers have always we've had a very important and a very inherent connection with rivers, which is rivers are life-giving, life-affirming. You farm next to rivers, they give you water for your plants, crops. And slowly we have moved really far away from rivers, because all the cities there are no, like I see in European cities, the rivers are always at the center of the city, and you have these nice promenades that you can walk on and appreciate the river. We don't have that in India. Except in maybe holy places where people want to go and take a dip in the river. It's not an interaction that is encouraged. We've moved further and further away from rivers, and rivers are there as almost inconveniences that, oh, they're taking up space. Why couldn't we build up a dam, and or why couldn't we just take over this little bit of land? So like that. Just reminded me of the consumerism and the development which drives away which has such a devastating impact on the environment everywhere.
And the fact that, you know, the developed world, you know, consumes far too much of the world's resources. So educating that world about what you're just talking about, and helping children to understand better that the world is a big and complex place is really really important.
I would say, like, my subjective approach would be, and I suppose Ayushi touched on it, it's developing empathy and compassion. And that filters into a worldview that's supportive of stepping back from consumerism a little bit, instead of speaking directly to them about those topics. Because if a child can develop empathy and compassion early on, they'll have an understanding that when they're buying a product, you know, that someone else has made that, and what's the chain of events that they're affecting there. So yeah, I think I don't want to simplify it. It is still a very complex issue. I'm not saying it's simple, but I think the approach is really to start right at the foundation and ensuring that children have the right worldview before we start talking to them about the particulars.
Yeah, I think it is a complex subject, but it needs to be developed. We need to change this narrative a little bit. Thank you for taking that subject, like consuming, and we tend to think that it's the urban places that we have to, you know, try to change. But we worked with Mayan community in Mexico and rural communities, and the problem was that because of the mobile phones, those children started to live in a different world than the one surrounded by them. So we're now making a book on a special native bee that they have there because they need to be protected. So it's again like those images, like from urban places that they have, that make them detached from their own reality, right? How do we balance this? It's not only the urban places that need a different narrative, but also what is the content that reaches those rural areas. Now, it's not only books, but visual language. Yeah. Any other question you would like to ask? Something like, so? No more questions? I mean, I think maybe we can just have like some time for you to have a look at the books. I mean, you didn't bring any books with you.
No, because those books, a lot of our work is in this space, is in curriculum building, like I said.
Yes, and I would suggest to go and visit, and the invitation program is in 4-1, H at the end of the corridor, and it's age 81, 80 something, 81, so you find them there. And 6.1, you can tell the details. You can have a look at the, and also you can also have a look at books for young adults that Walker Books been publishing, and related to this subject as well. So, okay, if we don't have any further questions, I think she's got the next meeting, and we wanted to finish on time. So you can talk to the speakers of course, and have a look at the books. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being here and taking your time during the very busy book fair. I know you have like
Thank you, Mariela.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you. And as I said, you can come and have a look at the books, browse a little bit, and ask further questions, like personally. Thank you again.